He was just mopping the marble floors at midnight until one sentence in perfect Mandarin stopped the CEO in her tracks. What happened next didn't just shake the company. It changed the meaning of value forever. Before we begin, if stories about quiet strength, second chances, and unexpected transformations speak to you, consider subscribing to the channel. We share true-to-life tales that inspire surprise and linger long after the last word. Now, let's begin. Single Dad was mopping floors. When he spoke, 5 languages, not knowing the CEO, heard every word. It was almost midnight in the marble-floored lobby of Hartman Global's headquarters in downtown Minneapolis. The building, with its 37 glass-paneled stories and badge-protected elevators, had mostly gone dark. Only the glow of security lights and the soft hum of vending machines accompanied the janitorial team's quiet movements. Eric Monroe mopped in steady rhythm, one hand on the handle, the other pushing earbuds deeper into his ears. But tonight he wasn't listening to music. He was revising his Portuguese vocabulary through an old podcast he'd downloaded for free years ago. Words rolled off his tongue in hushed practice. Pode me ajudar com isso. His tone fluid, his pronunciation crisp. "Excuse me," came a voice behind him, hesitant and accented. Eric turned, pulling the earbuds out. A middle-aged man in a beige overcoat stood at the front desk, flustered a crumpled business card in his hand. His English was broken at best, but the company logo on his badge matched Hartman's South American division. Eric smiled, switching instinctively into Portuguese. "Está procurando o elevador para o andar de reuniões." The man's face lit up. "Sim, obrigado, senhor." Eric pointed to the left corridor. "Use os elevadores prata. Aperte o botão para o 17º andar." As the man hurried off, visibly relieved, Eric returned to his mop. But before he could resume, another figure approached. The receptionist had long gone home. A young woman in a mustard coat stood near the directory screen, tapping without success. Her brows furrowed as she muttered in Mandarin. Eric stepped forward calmly. "Ni shu yao bang mang ma?" he asked. She turned, stunned. "Yes," she replied in accented English. "I can't find the name on this list." Eric scanned the screen and nodded. "Zai dc cheng. Hui yi shi zai yu bian. Wo dai ni kuba." He guided her gently toward the correct elevator bay. She looked at him with a smile that held more surprise than gratitude. "You speak very well." Eric simply replied, "I listen a lot," then returned to his mop and bucket. That was when it happened. A soft click of heels, intentional, deliberate, echoed from the hallway behind him. Eric didn't turn. He assumed it was another late-night employee passing through. He didn't know that the woman now watching him from the shadows of the mezzanine wasn't just another staffer. She was the CEO. Alyssa Hartman stood still, half hidden behind a concrete column, her black coat draped over her shoulders like a silent cloak. She had come down after a call from her London team ran late, and the air in her office had felt suffocating. She needed to walk. She didn't expect to witness whatever this was. In less than 5 minutes, this janitor, she didn't know his name, yet had just conversed in 3 languages, not only fluently, but with empathy, precision, and cultural nuance. No hesitation, no showmanship, just fluency. She watched him mop in silence, humming to himself, the earbuds back in. Then another interruption this time, a French-speaking delivery man confused by mislabeled storage areas. Without missing a beat, the janitor pulled out his clipboard and responded, "La salle de conférence est de l'autre côté. Je vous montre." He walked off beside the man, casually chatting, gesturing, smiling, then returned minutes later with the same calm rhythm. Alyssa was frozen. She wasn't one to overreact. In fact, her board often accused her of being too measured, too restrained. But something about this felt significant, like stumbling upon a violinist playing a symphony in a subway tunnel. She stepped forward, heels clicking louder now. Eric turned around, this time slightly startled but polite. "Evening, ma'am." Alyssa paused. Up close, he didn't look particularly remarkable. Faded green polo shirt under his janitor uniform, salt and pepper stubble on his jaw, calloused hands from years of labor. But his eyes were sharp and steady. "That was Mandarin, right?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Eric replied. "And before that, Portuguese and French." He hesitated for a second as if unsure whether to admit it. "Yes, ma'am." She tilted her head. "You speak all three, fluently." He gave a small nod. "Also Spanish and some Italian. And I can get by in German." "Impressive," she said. But her tone wasn't casual. It carried weight. Eric shifted. "I just picked it up over the years. Helps to listen." Alyssa looked at him for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Eric. Eric Monroe." "Well, Mr. Monroe." "I'm Alyssa." He blinked. That name. Hartman. He didn't say it, but she saw the realization land in his eyes. She extended her hand. He hesitated, then shook it firmly. "I'd like to ask you something," she said, stepping aside and gesturing toward the elevator. "Would you be willing to join me upstairs for a few minutes?" Eric looked at his mop bucket, then back at her. "Now, yes." He didn't answer right away. Years of cleaning offices after hours had taught him when to speak and when to stay invisible. But there was something in her expression, not obligation, not curiosity, but sincerity. He nodded. "All right." They stepped into the elevator together. As the doors slid shut, Alyssa glanced sideways. "You've worked here a long time," she asked. "Almost 7 years," Eric said. "Never been to the top floor, though." She smiled faintly. "You might be surprised how quickly things can change." Eric looked straight ahead, hands clasped in front of him. "I stopped believing in surprises a long time ago." Alyssa didn't respond, but something told her this was going to be one worth keeping. The elevator dinged, and for the first time in his life, Eric Monroe walked onto a floor where people didn't mop, they made decisions. Only this time the decision wasn't going to be made about him. It was going to be made with him. The executive floor had its own kind of silence, thick-weighted, almost reverent. As Eric stepped out of the elevator beside Alyssa Hartman, he instantly noticed the difference. The lights were warmer, the air cooler. A faint citrus scent floated in from the ventilation, and the carpet beneath his worn-out shoes muffled every step. He felt out of place. Not because anyone looked at him funny, there was no one there, but because the space itself whispered of tailored suits, quarterly reviews, and things discussed behind frosted glass. His faded janitor uniform and calloused hands didn't belong here. He'd cleaned this floor before, but only when it was empty. Never like this. Alyssa walked ahead without speaking, her heels soft against the carpet. She opened a glass door with her access badge and motioned for him to enter. The office beyond was spacious but minimalist, dark walnut desk, steel-framed bookshelves, a sleek espresso machine, and a massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the downtown skyline. One photo on the credenza showed 2 girls, maybe 7 and 9, hugging a golden retriever. Her daughters, Eric guessed. "Please," she said gently, motioning to the chair across from her desk. "Have a seat." Eric hesitated before sitting, hands resting on his knees. His fingers, rough from years of bleach and degreaser, were still slightly damp from the mop handle. Alyssa sat down across from him, crossing one leg over the other, expression calm but unreadable. "I want to be honest with you, Mr. Monroe. I didn't bring you up here to reprimand or praise you. I brought you up because I have questions." Eric gave a small nod, guarded but respectful. "You've worked here nearly 7 years," she continued. "You're in the system, but there's no detailed personnel file, no flagged incidents, no commendations either. You come in, you clean, you leave. And yet tonight I watched you navigate 3 complex interactions in 3 different languages, each with cultural accuracy and natural fluency." She leaned in slightly. "That's not something you just pick up. So I need to ask, why are you here? Mopping floors, I mean." Eric looked down at his hands for a moment, then up. "Is it okay if I tell you the truth? I wouldn't want anything less." He exhaled slowly. I was a language teacher. High school then, community college. I studied linguistics at Minnesota State. Graduated with honors. I was 2 years into my master's when my wife got sick. Fast-growing tumor. We fought it for 14 months. Insurance only covered the basics, and I burned through savings and student loans trying to keep her alive. A beat. The kind of pause that isn't for drama, but for memory. When she passed, I couldn't finish school. Couldn't pay off the debt. My son was 5. I did what I had to do, took night shifts at a grocery store, then a warehouse, then here. The janitorial team needed someone who could work odd hours, and I needed to be home by sunrise to get my boy ready for school. Alyssa's expression didn't change, but her grip on her coffee mug tightened slightly. "Why keep learning?" she asked quietly. Most people would have stopped. Eric gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because it's the only thing I had left that made me feel like I still mattered. I'd borrow books from the library, stream podcasts, listen to BBC Arabic while wiping down countertops. My son Jacob, he loved bedtime stories. So I started reading them to him in Spanish, then French. He picked up fast. He speaks 3 languages now. He added, "I don't have degrees on the wall anymore, but I've got cassette tapes worn thin and a kid who corrects my grammar in Italian." That counts for something. Alyssa nodded slowly but didn't speak. The silence stretched not awkward but contemplative. She stood up and walked to the window. Arms crossed, her reflection caught between panes of glass and shadow. "You know," she said, turning slightly, "I spent the last 5 years sitting in boardrooms across 3 continents listening to people talk about talent acquisition and global integration strategies. We pay consultants 6 figures to fix cross-cultural breakdowns. And here, right here under this roof, there's someone who's been doing that work quietly, invisibly." Eric didn't respond. He just watched her. "You ever think about doing something else?" she asked. "Sometimes, but it's hard to dream when your rent's due." That made her smile just a little. Not amused, just seen. "Can I show you something?" She walked to her desk, tapped her screen, and brought up a security feed, grainy black and white. She rewound it, then played it. Eric watched himself appear on screen cleaning. Then the 3 encounters. Portuguese, Mandarin, French, each moment captured in cold footage that somehow felt warmer through Alyssa's gaze. "I watched this twice," she said. "Not just for what you said, but how you said it. The tone, the body language. You weren't translating, you were connecting." She looked at him again. "I'm not asking for your resume, Mr. Monroe. I'm asking for your potential. Do you still believe in it?" Eric hesitated, then nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. But I stopped expecting others to believe in it with me." Alyssa walked back around the desk and sat down. "Maybe it's time someone did." Eric blinked. "You're not offering me a job, are you?" She grinned softly. "No, not yet. I'm offering you a conversation. One I want to continue with your permission." He leaned back, cautiously curious. "All right, what's next?" She looked at him. "I don't know yet, but I do know this: if the most multilingual person in my building is scrubbing tiles in silence, then I've been looking in the wrong direction for a long time." The clock behind her ticked to 12:47 a.m. Eric stood slow and steady. "May I go now? I've got the north corridor to finish." She nodded. "Of course. Thank you, Eric." He paused at the door. "You're welcome, Alyssa." And then he was gone, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of floor cleaner and a CEO who had just seen brilliance where she least expected it. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel so alone in that office anymore. The next morning began like most others at Hartman Global emails, pinging before sunrise, the elevator chiming on every floor, the scent of burnt coffee lingering near the copy machines. But for Alyssa Hartman, the day began with a deliberate pause. She sat in her corner office, eyes fixed on the skyline but her thoughts far from the city's bustle. Her mind kept returning to the night before, to Eric Monroe's quiet voice speaking perfect Portuguese, to the way he spoke of bedtime stories in Spanish and cassette tapes worn thin, to the way he'd walked out shoulders square not with arrogance, but dignity. She had no idea a janitor worked in 5 languages. No idea he'd once been a linguistics scholar. And, more importantly, no idea how many people like him had slipped through the cracks on her watch. By 9:00 a.m., she made a decision. Janine, she called to her assistant over the intercom. "Do we have that vendor meeting still set for 11? The one with the legal team?" "Yes, but there's a delay. The translator from the Lisbon office got stuck in customs. They'll join virtually, but they're still looking for someone to handle the Portuguese end." Alyssa smiled to herself. "Don't worry about it. I've got a backup plan." Eric was dusting the top of a vending machine on the 4th floor when a man in a tailored vest tapped him on the shoulder. "Are you Eric Monroe?" He turned. "Yes, sir. Ms. Hartman asked me to bring you up to Conference 6B. She said it's urgent." Eric's brows furrowed. His first instinct was that something had gone wrong. A spill, a complaint. But the man's tone was too measured for that. 10 minutes later, Eric walked into a room filled with 5 people in sleek suits and a large screen showing 4 more in a virtual feed. A set of contracts lay on the table along with packets of documents all marked confidential. At the head of the table sat Alyssa, calm and composed. "Mr. Monroe," she said, standing. "Thank you for coming." He looked around uneasily. "I thought this was a custodial matter." Alyssa gave a faint smile. "It's a linguistic one." Before Eric could respond, a man on the screen, a gray-haired executive from Lisbon, began speaking rapidly in Portuguese, clearly agitated about a set of clauses he claimed had been misrepresented. The room went quiet. No one at the table could keep up. Eric's body moved before his mind caught up. He stepped closer to the monitor. "Ele está dizendo que a cláusula do transporte foi alterada sem consulta prévia e que isso viola o acordo original," Eric translated clearly. The room froze. Alyssa gave a single nod. "Keep going." As the conversation continued, Eric translated in real time, toggling between Portuguese and English with the fluidity of a seasoned diplomat. He didn't just interpret words, he conveyed tone, emotion, cultural nuance. When one of the Lisbon executives made a joke to diffuse tension, Eric chuckled and relayed it with a grin. The Americans at the table laughed too, not just because of the joke, but because for the first time that morning they understood. After 20 minutes, the conversation wound down. The mood in the room had shifted. The Lisbon team agreed to amendments. Smiles replaced frowns. One executive even waved directly at Eric through the screen and said in English, "Where have you been hiding?" Eric gave a modest shrug, mostly around the elevator bays. Laughter rippled through the room. Alyssa stood. "Gentlemen, thank you. We'll finalize the red lines and follow up by tomorrow." As the screen went dark, she turned to Eric. "Can I speak with you a moment?" They stepped into the hallway. Alyssa didn't speak right away. She waited, giving him space. Eric rubbed the back of his neck. "So, what was that?" he asked. That she said softly was you being more effective than any consultant I've hired in 2 years. You're not just anything, Eric." Her tone was firmer now. "I set that up on purpose. I wanted to see how you handled pressure, how you carried yourself in a room where people don't usually see you. And you did more than hold your own. You led it." Eric didn't know what to say. "Tell me," Alyssa continued, "when was the last time someone asked you to use your mind at work?" He shook his head. "Not since I left the classroom." "Well, she said I'd like to change that." He looked at her cautious. "Why?" "Because I believe in investing where talent actually lives, not where resumes pretend it does." He smiled slightly. "Big words from a CEO? I mean every one of them." They stood in silence for a moment. Something shifted, something unspoken but undeniable. Then Eric cleared his throat. "I should get back to my route. The east stairwell gets sticky by noon." Alyssa nodded, but her voice softened. "One more thing. There's a program I've been thinking about starting. Something to identify underused talent inside the company. People working in support roles who have more to give. I don't have all the details yet, but Eric tilted his head. You want me to be part of it. I want you to help shape it. He studied her for a long moment as if trying to decide whether this was real, whether she was real. Finally, he nodded once. All right, he said. I'm in. As he turned and walked down the hall, Alyssa watched him go. Something tugged quietly at her chest. Not admiration alone, not curiosity. Something gentler, something closer. It wasn't just about potential anymore. It was about him. Alyssa Hartman didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling of her high-rise apartment, the city's soft glow pulsing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Normally, the exhaustion from a day of meetings and damage control would have put her under in minutes. But tonight, her thoughts looped like a song stuck on the wrong chord, always returning to the same image. Eric Monroe, standing calmly in a room full of executives translating with a confidence he didn't even seem to recognize. Not selling himself, not performing, just doing what needed to be done. That wasn't what held her awake, though. It was the quiet in his voice when he said I stopped expecting others to believe in it with me. It was the way his eyes drifted to the floor every time someone tried to compliment him as if he'd been conditioned to deflect grace before it could land. Alyssa had known people like Eric before, brilliant, capable, overlooked. But something about him was different. It wasn't just the language skills or even the humility. It was the weight he carried without letting it show. The way he moved through spaces like he didn't want to disturb the air around him. She'd seen that before. In herself. 12 hours later, she stood in the lobby of Hartman Global dressed in her usual muted palette, dark slacks, soft blouse-tailored blazer. Her hair was pulled back her heels low, power dressing restrained, professionalism that didn't invite questions. As she waited for the elevator, she glanced around the open floor plan. Most of the employees walked quickly, eyes glued to screens or coffee cups. She noticed the cleaning staff folding linen carts near the far corner. No one looked at them, just like no one looked at her years ago when she interned at a multinational firm in Boston. She had been 22, fresh out of NYU, speaking 3 languages and managing international calls like a junior executive. But what people remembered was that she wore the same pair of shoes 3 days in a row and brought lunch in reused takeout containers. She was the daughter of a single mother, a Thai immigrant who worked as a prep cook for a catering company. Alyssa had learned English and Thai at the same time, Spanish in high school and Mandarin in college. But for most of her early career, all anyone seemed to notice was that she was young female and not quite from here. She didn't blame them, not anymore. But she hadn't forgotten either. Later that day, Alyssa reviewed a dozen internal performance reports. Sales, logistics, marketing, all functional, all cold. No data could tell her what mattered most right now, what people really thought about Eric Monroe's presence upstairs. So she stepped out of her office and walked unannounced down to the service level. The janitorial break room was smaller than she expected. Plastic chairs, faded posters about safety, a refrigerator with more magnets than food. Eric sat alone at a corner table eating from a paper bowl of microwave noodles. He looked up when she entered, blinking in surprise. Ms. Hartman. Off the clock, Eric, she said, smiling slightly. Just Alyssa. He straightened. Did I do something wrong? No, she said. I just wanted to talk, if that's okay. He nodded slowly, motioning to the seat across from him. She sat, smoothing the crease in her pants. I used to eat meals like that, she said, glancing at the noodles. Only mine were usually cold by the time I got to them. Eric chuckled. Still are. This microwave's been dying since 2018. They sat in silence for a moment. I wanted to ask, she said gently, how you really felt in that meeting yesterday. You seemed composed, but I was terrified, he admitted. I thought one wrong word, and they'd call security to escort me back to the basement. But you didn't say anything wrong. I've spent years assuming I don't belong in rooms like that. Feels strange to be asked in. She nodded. Same. He raised an eyebrow. You're the CEO. Now she said. But it wasn't always that way. And then, unexpectedly, she told him about the internship. The shoes. The silence. The way she used to translate calls in the hallway because she wasn't given a desk. How she was mistaken for the receptionist twice at her first board meeting as VP. Eric listened, expression softening. I know what it's like, she said quietly, to have more to give and nowhere to give it. And I know what it means when someone finally sees you. He stared at her for a long moment, then looked down at his hands. My son once asked me why I didn't try harder to move up. I told him I didn't want to reach for a ladder that wasn't built for me. Alyssa's throat tightened. Then maybe we build a new ladder, she said. Eric's gaze met hers again. There was something deeper in it now, mutual understanding, unspoken trust. A flicker of something else too. But neither named it. Before she left, she paused at the door. You said you read bedtime stories in Spanish, right? He nodded. Still do. Jacob's in college now, but when he's home we pick up where we left off. Always in a different language. She smiled. That's beautiful. He shrugged. It's how we stayed connected. Maybe, she said, that's how you'll help connect this whole company. He didn't reply, but the way he watched her as she turned and left, that said enough. That evening, as Alyssa reviewed emails in her apartment, she stopped halfway through a quarterly report and opened a blank document. At the top, she typed, Internal Talent Initiative, Phase 1 Identification, and below that, Lead Consultant Eric Monroe. She stared at it for a long time, then saved it under a name only she would understand, the ladder that didn't exist. For the first time in years, Eric Monroe hesitated outside an elevator. He stood in the main lobby of Hartman Global Janitor's cart parked neatly against the wall, eyes fixed on the brass doors as they opened and closed in regular intervals. His shift had technically ended 15 minutes ago. The mop handle still bore the damp weight of the north corridor, and his back ached in the usual spot where age and effort had shaken hands years ago. But something was different tonight. Tucked in his pocket was a handwritten note, simple and direct. Eric. If you're available, I'd appreciate 10 minutes. No pressure. Alyssa. He hadn't received a note like that since his teaching days back when faculty left messages in one another's boxes. Before, illness and loss and overnight shifts erased that version of his life. He exhaled, stepped into the elevator, and pressed 30. The climb felt longer than usual. Alyssa was waiting not behind her desk but near the window arms, loosely crossed gaze on the horizon. She turned when she heard the elevator chime. Eric entered cautiously, hat in hand, literally. The same faded baseball cap he wore every night sat crumpled between his fingers. Ms. Hart Alyssa, he corrected himself. She smiled gently. Come in, Eric. Sit down. He hesitated, but obeyed, lowering himself into the same chair he'd occupied during their first late-night conversation. I wanted to speak with you, Alyssa began, about something beyond translation. Eric raised an eyebrow. I've been working on a project, she continued, an internal initiative to identify talent within the company that's gone unrecognized or underutilized. It's something I've wanted to do for years, but never had the right reason or the right person to anchor it. Eric waited. I want you to lead it with me. Silence, the kind that hangs between two people when neither is quite sure how to breathe yet. You want me? He asked at last. Yes. To lead something with me. Yes. Eric looked down, then chuckled softly. You know, I still change trash bags on the mezzanine floor, right I do. And I also know you speak 5 languages, used to teach linguistics, and solved a contract impasse last week that's been stuck for 6 months. So, I'm weighing the full picture. He shook his head slowly. I don't even have a college degree anymore. I never finished my master's. I've never supervised a team. I've never given a presentation. I don't own a suit. I've been out of the loop for years. Alyssa leaned forward. I'm not asking for polished. I'm asking for principled, for someone who understands what it means to be overlooked and what it takes to see others clearly. The rest, that's just noise. He stared at her for a long beat, unsure whether to be honored or terrified. What would I actually do? We'd start small, she said. You'd help design the structure, what to look for, how to train, how to bridge between departments. You'd attend meetings, give feedback, interview candidates, shape the narrative. You'd have a desk, a budget, a title. He blinked. What title were still working on it? But something like Cultural Access Advisor or Director of Internal Equity. Something that reflects your real value. Eric leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. His gaze drifted to the framed photo on her credenza again, 2 girls and a dog in a patch of grass, smiling like the world had never hurt them. I appreciate it, he said quietly. But I don't think I'm the right guy. Why not? Because people don't listen to folks like me. Alyssa's tone sharpened just slightly. Then maybe that's exactly why you should be the one speaking. He looked at her. Really looked at her this time. Not as a CEO, not as a woman in a corner office, but as a person. And what he saw there wasn't ambition or pity. It was belief. Not the kind you buy or borrow, but the kind that changes people. You're serious about this, he said. I am. He looked away, heart beating harder than it had any right to after a day of mopping floors and changing out hand soap. I have a son, he said after a pause. He's 22, just got into Arizona State, wants to study international relations. Alyssa smiled. I'm guessing he learned from the best. I used to think I'd failed him, Eric admitted. That all he ever saw was me in uniform cleaning up after others. But he told me once, you don't have to wear a suit to be brilliant. You just have to keep showing up when nobody else does. He swallowed. Maybe it's time I listened. Alyssa said nothing. She didn't need to. Finally, Eric straightened in his chair. What happens if I say yes? She met his gaze. Then we build something that never existed before. Together. He stood up, folding his cap. Slowly, fingers tracing the same curve over and over. I'll need some time, he said. Of course, but if I do this, I don't want special treatment. I don't want parades. I just want the work to matter. It will. He nodded, once turned to leave. At the door, he paused. You really think I can do this? Alyssa tilted her head. I wouldn't have asked if I didn't. And somehow, in that quiet space between doubt and decision, something new took root, something that neither salary nor title could buy. Respect, real, earned, and shared, and it would only grow from here. Eric Monroe stood outside the glass doors of the executive wing, his reflection staring back at him like a version of himself he didn't quite recognize. His janitor's badge still clipped to his chest, his work shoes scuffed from years of bleach and hall dust. But now, in his hand, he held a temporary pass printed just hours earlier. Access Level Executive. Valid indefinitely. He took a breath. Then he stepped through. The air was different here. Crisper, cooler, and quieter than anywhere he'd ever cleaned. No chatter, no clatter of carts. Just the distant click of polished heels and the occasional muted ringtone behind frosted glass walls. Everyone wore navy gray or black. No one smiled unless they had a reason. Heads turned as Eric passed. Some glanced up from their desks. Some didn't even try to hide their curiosity. A few looked at his shoes, others at the badge. One woman near the printers whispered something behind her hand. He felt every stare like a pinprick, but he kept walking straight to the desk Alyssa had assigned him. A modest corner space near the internal comms office. No view, no window, but it had a nameplate waiting for him. Eric Monroe, Cultural Access Consultant. There was even a small basket of office supplies, a clean notepad, and a post-it note that read, "You belong here. Start however you want." A. He didn't realize how much he needed to read those 5 words until he did. He sat down, hands resting on the desk. The last time he'd had a desk job, the internet still whistled to connect and phones had cords. This felt like a different lifetime. A polite knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Monroe. A man in a tailored gray vest stood at his door, short cropped blonde hair, sharp jawline tablet in hand. Victor Landry, Director of International Operations. Eric stood to shake his hand. "I hear you're part of the new integration initiative," Victor said. "Interesting choice." Eric offered a small neutral smile. "Guess we'll find out if it works." Victor stepped into the office uninvited and placed a thick folder on the desk. "Here's something to get you started. It's a series of reports from our Milan and Dubai partners. We've had some translation inconsistencies and vendor disputes. I figured, if you're going to be here, might as well see what it looks like from the top." There was an edge to his voice, calm but calculated. Eric recognized it. It was the tone of someone who was giving you a chance not to impress them but to fail quietly. "I'll look it over," Eric said evenly. Victor nodded, then paused at the door. "Let me know if anything confuses you." Eric didn't respond. He waited until the man left, then opened the folder. 30 pages, half of them in Italian, a quarter in Arabic, some sprinkled with English annotations and scribbled notes, contracts, invoices, memos. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. By noon, Eric had red-penned 5 translation errors that had cost the company nearly $22,000 in duplicated vendor shipping and logistics. He typed up a memo, clear, neutral in tone, structured the way Alyssa had shown him in a template email, and sent it to Victor with suggested corrections and a list of questions. He expected silence. He got a reply 10 minutes later. "Understood. Reviewing now." That was it. No thank you. No good work. Just the sterile acknowledgement of a system not yet ready to admit it had underestimated him. But Eric wasn't doing this for praise. He wasn't sure he even knew how to want that anymore. He was doing this for Jacob, for the version of himself that used to stand in front of a classroom pointer in hand explaining how language wasn't just about grammar, it was about identity, humanity, connection. That afternoon, as he returned from a short walk to the break room, he saw Alyssa waiting by his desk. She wore a navy blouse, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and a look on her face that wasn't quite a smile, but something better. Recognition. "How's day 1?" she asked. Eric shrugged. "I've had worse." "No mops." She grinned. "That's a win already." He handed her a short printout of the corrections. Also found some gaps in Victor's vendor chain. She scanned the document quickly. Her brows lifted. "This is solid. He won't say it, but this'll help him save face with Dubai. He already told me it was an interesting choice bringing me in." Alyssa's expression didn't shift, but her voice cooled just slightly. "Let him wonder. You're not here for his comfort. I'm not here for anyone's discomfort either." "Then just keep doing what you're doing," she said. "Truth has a way of settling into the room whether people like it or not." Eric looked at her brow, softening. "You've got more fire than you let on." Alyssa shrugged. "You have more impact than you realize." Their eyes met just for a second. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. But it was connected. Two people who had known invisibility, who had walked into rooms that weren't made for them and stayed anyway. "You staying late?" he asked. "Always," she said. "Old habit. Want company?" he asked almost without thinking. "Not personal. Just, I make good tea." She considered it, then nodded once. 15 minutes. Rooftop patio deal. And just like that, something unspoken began to shift between them. Not fast, not fragile, but real. A seed planted between silence and effort. Eric sat back at his desk, returned to the files. For the first time since losing his wife, since giving up his career, since learning how to fade into corners, he didn't feel like he had to disappear anymore. Not here. Not now. Not with her watching and believing. It began, as these things often did, with a whisper. A casual remark by the coffee station. A glance exchanged across the boardroom. A quiet question. "Did you hear about the janitor in the executive wing?" Within 48 hours of Eric Monroe's first day upstairs, the chatter had spread like spilled ink, and by Friday morning it wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a current. "Wait, are you serious? I heard he speaks 5 languages. Are we hiring out of pity now? I mean, he seems nice. Is this some DEI stunt? I've been here 8 years and I've never been invited to present to leadership." Victor Landry didn't say much. He didn't have to. His silences carried more weight than his words. And when he delivered his weekly vendor report at the department leads meeting, he made a point of not mentioning Eric's contributions, except for a vague, "We've corrected a few minor translation discrepancies," without naming who had corrected them. Alyssa noticed. So did Eric, but he said nothing. Not at first. The tension finally surfaced on a gray Tuesday morning during an executive strategy session. 20 people in a glass-walled conference room. Alyssa at the head of the table. Eric seated off to the side, flipping quietly through a binder of multilingual vendor contracts. Midway through the meeting, a logistics manager named Carol Foster raised her hand. "I just want to clarify," she said crisply, "this new internal initiative, the one targeting untapped talent, was that approved through HR?" Alyssa met her gaze. It was cleared through corporate development. "And Mr. Monroe's role in it, how long is that trial expected to last?" Eric didn't look up. He didn't need to. He could feel the air shift. "There is no trial," Alyssa said calmly. "Eric has been formally appointed to the position. But he doesn't have corporate credentials," Carol continued. "No HR certifications, no prior team leadership. We're not questioning his character, just the precedent." Another voice chimed in from the left. "Jeremy Tate, a regional strategy officer. Young, ambitious. Never missed a chance to align himself with power." "I think what Carol means," he said with a performative smile, "is that we all value internal mobility. But bypassing traditional pathways might raise fairness concerns. Optics, if nothing else. That word, optics. It wasn't about integrity. It was about perception, appearances, control." Alyssa looked down for a moment as if measuring her words precisely. Eric was selected based on demonstrated performance, not perceived pedigree. If this were about optics, I'd have sent a memo and moved on. But I didn't. I gave a seat to someone who's earned it through fluency, adaptability, and insight, not just resume formatting. Victor leaned back in his chair. "With respect, Alyssa, we've always valued expertise. But if we start rebranding janitors as strategic advisors, we run the risk of diluting operational clarity." Eric's pen paused mid-note. Then slowly he closed his binder and looked up. "If I may," he said, voice steady, "I'd like to clarify something." The room quieted. His tone wasn't defensive. It wasn't angry. It was precise, like a man who had learned to make every word count because so few were ever invited. "I didn't ask for this position. I didn't apply for it. I didn't campaign or angle or strategize. I was asked to step in first for a translation issue, then for a broader role." He met Victor's eyes. "And while I don't have a title from Wharton or Columbia, I do have 20 years of lived cultural engagement. I've taught. I've translated. I've raised a multilingual child on a custodial paycheck, and I've watched decisions made in rooms like this cost companies real relationships overseas because no one could pronounce a client's name correctly." He turned to Carol. "And if this makes you uncomfortable, I understand. Disruption always does. But I'm not here to take anyone's place. I'm here to make sure fewer things and fewer people get overlooked." Silence. Not stunned, not scandalized, but shifted. For the first time in that room, some heads nodded, not all, but some, and not just in agreement, but in realization. Alyssa didn't speak for several seconds. When she did, her voice was softer than usual. "Thank you, Eric." He nodded, sat back, and opened his binder again. Victor adjusted his tie and looked away. Later that day, Alyssa found Eric in the hallway outside his small office, leaning against the wall, staring at the framed floor directory like it had asked him a question he couldn't quite answer. She approached quietly. "You okay?" He gave a half shrug. "Been through worse, but not this kind of worse." He looked at her a little surprised. "You've been through it too." She smiled faintly. "You don't get to where I am without being told you don't belong there. The key is knowing that doesn't make it true." He nodded. "I just didn't expect it to feel so familiar." "It shouldn't," she said. "But until we change the structure, it will." They stood in silence for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, both looking at the elevator that had once seemed too high for either of them. "I'm glad you spoke up," she said. "I wasn't trying to make a point," he replied. "I just didn't want to disappear again." "You didn't," Alyssa said, "and I won't let you." He smiled just a little. Then she added more softly, "You're not the only one in this building who's ever felt invisible, Eric, but you might be the first to make visibility feel like a gift instead of a demand." He blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," she teased. "You still have to present at next week's cross-department seminar." His eyes widened. "You're kidding." "Nope." He laughed under his breath. "You really do like watching me squirm." She grinned. "Only when I know you'll rise to it." And as she walked away, he watched her go, not as his boss, not as the person who gave him a shot, but as the first person in a very long time who made him want to rise. The rain started just as Eric stepped out of the building. It was soft at first, more a whisper than a storm, dampening the pavement and soaking the edges of his work shoes. He didn't pull up his hood. He liked the feeling of it. It cleared his head. He crossed the street to the small bench across from Hartman Global's towering lobby, the same bench he used to eat lunch on during his early days when he couldn't afford a cafeteria meal. Back then, he'd sit with a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in foil, watching people in suits pass him by without a second glance. Now he sat there again, but the world felt different. Not better, just heavier. Inside, he'd held his own in a room full of power. He'd spoken truths that had needed saying, but outside, he felt every ounce of the weight those truths left behind. Every syllable had come with a cost, not because he regretted them, but because he finally understood that stepping into the light meant burning a little in the process. He took out his phone, scrolled to the name he knew by heart, Jacob Monroe. He hesitated, then hit call. The phone rang once, twice, then, "Hey, Dad." Jacob's voice always sounded like sunlight, warm, steady, confident. A far cry from the boy who used to cry when his dad left for the night shift or whisper in Spanish just to make Eric smile. "You busy?" Eric asked. "A little. Midterms coming up. But I've got a few minutes." "You okay?" Eric didn't answer right away. "Dad." "I'm fine," he said. "Just needed to hear your voice." Jacob was quiet for a second, then asked, "What happened?" Eric leaned forward, elbows on knees, rain dripping from his sleeves. "I spoke in a meeting today. Real one. Executive room. All glass and suits and PowerPoints." Jacob whistled. "Damn. And you didn't burst into flames." Eric laughed. "Not yet. What did you say I told them the truth? About who I am. About why I'm here. Some of them listened. Some didn't." Jacob's voice softened. "And how do you feel?" Exposed Eric said. "Like I finally stood still long enough for people to actually look at me. And now I'm wondering if I should have kept moving." "You've always moved for other people," Jacob said. "Maybe it's time you moved for yourself." Eric closed his eyes. That's what Jacob did. Always cut through the noise. "You know," Jacob continued, "when I wrote my scholarship essay, they asked me who inspired me. I wrote about you. Not because of the languages, but because you kept showing up. Every night, every morning, and you never made it about you. But now, maybe it can be." Eric swallowed hard. "I'm proud of you, Dad." and that broke something gently open inside him, not in a way that shattered, but in a way that released. "Thanks, kid," he said, voice low. They talked for a few more minutes about school, about a professor who mispronounced diplomacy about the ramen place Jacob had discovered that reminded him of when they used to make dumplings together. It was small talk, but to Eric, it was soul talk. When they hung up, he sat there for a while longer, the rain washing over the silence. Then he stood and walked back across the street. The next morning, Alyssa arrived at her office early. She was halfway through her first coffee when Janine buzzed her. "There's someone here to see you. Says he's Eric's son." Alyssa blinked. "Send him in." The door opened and in stepped a tall, clean-cut young man with his father's eyes and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He offered a polite smile, uncertain but composed. "Hi," he said. "I'm Jacob." Alyssa stood and shook his hand. "I'm Alyssa. Come in. I hope it's okay. I was visiting campus and I figured I'd stop by." "Of course. Sit." He did. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for seeing my dad. Not just promoting him, seeing him." Alyssa's breath caught. Jacob continued. "You don't know how long I've watched him carry things no one else noticed. The late nights, the double shifts, learning languages while scrubbing sinks, reading me stories in French when I was 6 because it was the only way he knew how to keep the world magical." She smiled but said nothing. "I used to think no one would ever recognize him, that he'd fade out the way so many good people do, but now—" He trailed off. Alyssa nodded slowly. "Now he's walking into rooms they never meant for him." Jacob smiled. "Yeah, and he's not walking in alone." There was a pause. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "I found this in our storage last week. I thought maybe he'd want it." He handed it to her. Alyssa unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a battered paperback notebook. On the cover, the faded words Spanish 101, Jacob's Stories. "I remember this," he said. "He used to write translations of bedtime tales for me, 1 per week, even when he was exhausted, even when he hadn't eaten." Alyssa ran her fingers over the worn pages. "I wanted you to see who he's always been," Jacob said. "I see him," Alyssa replied, "more clearly than most people I've ever met." Jacob stood. "Then you're the kind of leader this place needs." He offered his hand again. She shook it. As he left, Alyssa sat down, the notebook in her lap, the weight of it like an artifact from a life too rich to stay hidden. She stared at the door for a long time after it closed. Then she picked up her phone and made a call. "Eric, you free around 3 today? I think it's time we talk about the future and how many others we've walked past without knowing." And somewhere beneath the clean lines and corporate rhythms of Hartman Global, something old and quiet began to rise. Legacy, not written in titles, but in the people we choose to lift. Eric Monroe stood at the threshold of the executive suite once again, same polished floor, same frosted glass walls, but the weight pressing against his chest was heavier than the last time he was here. Not fear, exactly, not even doubt, but something deeper, like walking back into a room you were never supposed to leave, but also never certain you'd be welcome to return to. 2 days had passed since the seminar fallout, since the stares, since the subtle disapproval from some and the quiet encouragement from a few. And yesterday, after sitting in his truck for 30 minutes with the engine off and the sun rising behind him, he'd sent the email, "Alyssa, if the door's still open, I'd like to talk." She replied in less than 5 minutes. It never closed. "Come at 3. Now here he was. He took a breath and stepped inside. Alyssa was already waiting, not behind her desk, but by the window again, as if that had become her private thinking place. The skyline stretched behind her like a canvas of light and steel. She turned the moment she heard the door. "Hey," she said. "Not Mr. Monroe, not Sir, not even Eric with formal distance. Just, hey, soft, familiar." "Hey," he returned. She motioned to the seat across from her desk. He walked over slowly and sat. There was a pause. "I saw Jacob," she said. Eric's eyebrows lifted. "He didn't tell me. He wanted it to be a surprise." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "That kid always was more confident than I deserved. He's proud of you." Eric looked down at his hands. "Yeah," he said. "He said something like that. He gave me something." Alyssa reached into a drawer and gently placed the weathered notebook on the desk. Spanish 101. Jacob's Stories. Eric stared at it. His throat tightened. He hadn't seen that notebook in years. The corner was still bent. The ink faded on the cover from too many nights on cheap kitchen counters. "I used to write in it on my break," he murmured. "At the hospital, when my wife was sleeping." Alyssa didn't speak. She didn't need to. "I didn't know he'd kept it," Eric said, voice rough. "He said it was how you made the world magical." Eric swallowed. "I didn't have money for toys, but I could give him stories, in every language I could find." Silence settled between them again, but this time it was warm, respectful. "I left because I didn't want to make things harder for you," he said. "Didn't want people to think this was about optics or emotion. I know, but I also realized disappearing hasn't helped anyone, least of all me." Alyssa nodded. "So why are you really here today?" Eric leaned forward. "Because I'm tired of being underestimated and even more tired of acting like that's okay." She smiled, small and genuine. "Good." He looked around the office, then back at her. "You said you wanted to build something." "I do. With me, with you. What does that look like?" Alyssa stood walking around the desk. She placed a folder in front of him, flipping it open. Inside were outlines, slides, program descriptions, timelines. At the top, Second Sight Initiative, Phase 1 Internal Pilot Training, she said. Mentorship, language support, soft skill development, identification of overlooked employees. You and I would co-lead it. Together. Eric scanned the first page. It wasn't flashy. It was solid. Intentional. "You've already started," he said. "I needed to show the board a plan before I could fight for approval. Now I have the data, the story, and the face that proves it works." He looked at her. "And you're not worried about more pushback. I welcome it." He raised an eyebrow. "Because now," she added, "they're not just pushing back against an idea. They're pushing back against a man who's already changed the way we operate, and that's harder to ignore." Eric sat back. "You know," he said slowly, "I've had a lot of jobs where people told me to stay in my lane." Alyssa smiled. "That's the problem with lanes. They keep people locked into paths they never chose." He nodded, thoughtful. "I'm in," he said, finally. "But I want to do it right. No tokenism. No pity. If I don't deliver you, pull me." Alyssa extended her hand. "I'd never expect less." He took it. Her hand was warm, firm, and it didn't feel like a business handshake. It felt like a promise. The following Monday, Eric returned officially, not as a janitor, not as a guest, but as a team lead. His badge was reissued, his desk upgraded. A small nameplate read, "Eric Monroe, Second Sight Program Director." Some people still whispered. A few stared. But more than that, some smiled. People he'd passed for years without a word now greeted him in elevators, stopped to ask how the initiative was going. And at the end of the day, as he gathered his notes and shut down his laptop, he found something new taped to the corner of his monitor. A sticky note. Just 5 words scrawled in looping handwriting. "We see you. Keep going." No name, no department. But for the first time in decades, Eric didn't wonder if he belonged. He just got back to work. By 8:02 a.m., Eric Monroe had already rewritten 2 contract clauses, corrected a mislabeled Mandarin memo, and gently redirected a junior staffer who'd accidentally attached the wrong version of a vendor agreement. By 8:45, he'd fielded a call from the Berlin office, caught a translation error that would have changed delivery priority to delivery liability, and saved the company $30,000 in reputational damage. But what stuck with him that morning wasn't any of that. It was the silence. Not just the hush of the executive wing, the usual polished quiet that echoed off glass and brushed metal, but the quiet inside his inbox. The emails had stopped. No pushback. No passive-aggressive as-discussed messages. No clipped replies laced with skepticism. Just work. Sent. Done. Trusted. Eric leaned back in his chair. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first time in months he didn't feel like he had to defend every step he took. Still, he wasn't naive. He knew calm often came before another wave. So when Alyssa stopped by his office at 10:30, holding 2 coffees and wearing that half-smile she only showed when something big was coming, he straightened. "You look suspicious," he said. "I am," she replied, but in a good way. She handed him the coffee just the way he liked it, strong, no sugar splash of milk. He didn't remember telling her that. She sat in the guest chair, crossing one leg over the other. "I want to invite you to speak." He blinked. To who? Everyone. His brows lifted. Everyone. Like HR everyone, she repeated. Cross-departmental seminar. Wednesday. A full session on cultural integration, internal equity, and the launch of Second Sight. Eric stared at her. "I've never spoken at anything bigger than a PTA meeting," he said. "I've heard you in a boardroom, Eric. You don't need polish. You just need truth." He looked down at his hands. "And what happens if I choke, you won't. And if I do?" She shrugged. "Then you choke, and we pick up where you left off." He gave a quiet laugh. "You're very reassuring in a jump-off-the-roof-with-me kind of way. It's a talent," she said, smiling. But beneath the smile he saw something deeper, a flicker of nerves rare for her. Not about the presentation. About him. Not pressure, not expectation, but hope and trust. Wednesday arrived faster than it should have. Eric stood behind the curtain of the central auditorium watching as chairs filled marketing, HR, procurement, regional ops, even interns. Some faces he recognized. Many he didn't. Alyssa stood beside him reviewing her notes. When she looked up, she found him shifting his weight like a teenager at his first dance. "Still time to fake a fire drill," he muttered. She didn't laugh. Instead, she turned toward him fully. "You're not here to impress them, Eric. You're here to remind them what we forgot to see." He nodded. The lights dimmed. A hush settled, and then his name was called. He stepped out. At first, the spotlight blinded him, but then he saw faces, rows of them, waiting, curious, unsure of what to expect from the man who used to sweep the floors and now stood at the podium. He didn't use a teleprompter, didn't read from notes. He just began. "When I first walked into this building, it was through the loading dock. I was carrying a mop bucket and a carton of industrial cleaner. No one looked at me twice, and I didn't expect them to. I spoke 5 languages back then. I was raising a son. I'd taught at 2 schools, but here I was, just the guy who emptied the trash. And I was okay with that, or at least I told myself I was. Because when you've lived long enough being overlooked, you stop expecting doors to open. You just start cleaning around them." He paused, and then one day someone held the door open instead of walking through it alone. From the front row, Alyssa didn't move, but her fingers tightened slightly around the armrest. She didn't do it for credit, or for applause. She did it because she believed that brilliance doesn't wear a uniform, and that sometimes the clearest vision comes from the people no one ever thought to ask. He told them about the initiative Second Sight, about the quiet talent buried inside departments that rarely made headlines, about the janitor who translated between 3 departments before anyone realized they were speaking the same language. He told them about how he'd learned Korean from a dishwasher who missed home and French from a hospice nurse who used to hum lullabies to patients. How language wasn't just communication, it was dignity. By the time he reached the final line, no one was checking phones. "I wasn't promoted to make anyone uncomfortable," he said. "But if my presence here does, maybe it's worth asking why. Because I didn't change who I am to be here. I just stopped hiding it." The room was silent. Then it stood. Not everyone, but enough. Applause, not explosive, not performative, just honest. Grateful. Alyssa met his eyes as he stepped off stage. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The work had spoken. That night, back at his desk, Eric found a note slipped under his keyboard. Neat handwriting, unfamiliar. "My mom's a cafeteria worker. She speaks 5 languages, too. I used to be ashamed of that. Not anymore. Thank you." No name, no department. But it didn't matter, because in that moment, Eric Monroe understood something more powerful than titles or speeches or initiatives. He hadn't just stepped into the room. He'd opened the door behind him. And someone else, maybe, someone just like he once was already starting to walk through. The Friday after the seminar, Eric arrived at Hartman Global earlier than usual. The lobby was still quiet, filled only with the soft hum of HVAC vents and the occasional click of a coffee machine. For the first time since he'd been promoted, no one stared when he passed by. They nodded, smiled. A few even said, "Morning, Mr. Monroe," like he'd always belonged there. It was strange in a good way. But the strangest part was that it no longer felt like a costume. The badge around his neck, the crisp button-down, the quiet authority people had started to assign to his voice. It didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. Still, something tugged at him beneath the surface. A question that had lingered in the background since the beginning. Since that first night, Alyssa Hartman heard him speak 5 languages without knowing she was listening. Why her? Why had she seen him? And why did that matter more than he could admit? That afternoon, Alyssa found him reviewing the first round of internal applications for the second site pilot. He looked up as she entered, no knock, no warning, and smiled. "You always walk in like you own the place," he said. "I technically do," she replied. They both chuckled. She sat across from him, letting the quiet settle for a moment. "The feedback from your talk was incredible," she said. "You've got a fan club in logistics now. I hear they're making T-shirts," he deadpanned, "in 5 languages." She laughed, and something in her face softened just a little. They fell into easy conversation, reviewing applicants' brainstorming ways to build mentorship programs without making them feel corporate or performative. But eventually, the discussion slowed, shifted, changed. Alyssa leaned back in her chair. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. Eric nodded. "Why did you really say yes to all of this? The program, the visibility, the pressure. Why step into a spotlight you never asked for?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "Because for years I kept my head down, told myself it was noble, that I was just doing what needed to be done. But the truth is, I was afraid. I'd already lost so much: my wife, my career, the version of myself I thought I was supposed to be. And when someone like you looks at you like you still matter, it does something. You made me feel like it wasn't too late." She swallowed, quietly. "And maybe," he added, "because it wasn't just about the job. Maybe I said yes because you were the first person in a long time who didn't talk down to me. You saw through the uniform, through the dust, and you didn't flinch." Alyssa looked down, then back at him. "You know what I saw?" she asked. "Someone who made me remember why I started this in the first place. Someone who reminded me that leadership isn't about title or posture, it's about presence. About staying when it's easier to walk away. About lifting others even when you're the one carrying weight." They were quiet again. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full. Something unspoken passed between them. A warmth, a question, a choice. Eric stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Lights flickered to life in the distance. The sky was turning that soft shade of gold before dusk. "You ever think," he said, "about what love looks like?" "When you're older," Alyssa raised an eyebrow. "Like 48 older?" He smiled. "Exactly." She considered it. "I think it looks quieter," she said. "Less about declarations, more about consistency. Someone who shows up, listens, fights for you, not just with you." He turned to face her. That's what I thought too. Her voice dropped barely above a whisper. Are we still talking about programs and strategy? Eric shook his head. No, he said, and in that moment there was nothing flashy, no sweeping music, no sudden kiss. Just two people weathered, real honest, sitting in the soft light of earned trust. Alyssa stood and walked to him. If you ever want to talk, she said outside these walls, I wouldn't mind that. I make a mean cup of tea, he replied. Is that a bribe? It's a promise. She smiled, really smiled this time. The kind that didn't come from confidence, but from comfort. I'll hold you to it. And then she reached out not to shake his hand, not to pat his shoulder, but to take it. Briefly, gently, with quiet certainty. They let go before anyone walked past the office. But the feeling stayed. That evening, Eric walked out of the building alone, but lighter than he had in years. His phone buzzed. A message from Jacob. Just saw your name on the Hartman website. Looks like you're a real executive now. Can I still call you Dad, or do I need to schedule an appointment? Eric chuckled and replied, Only if you bring your laundry. He turned the corner, heading to the parking garage. He didn't know what tomorrow would hold, but tonight he knew this. He'd found purpose again. He'd found voice, and maybe he'd found something even more rare. A second chance, at love, at life, at being fully seen, and finally seen back. The plaque was simple. Matte black, brushed brass lettering, no embellishments, just 5 words engraved with quiet dignity, The Wallace Room, Second Sight Initiative. In recognition of those we almost missed. It hung just outside the largest training and development space on the 15th floor. The hallway was filled with morning sunlight streaming through wide windows, casting soft shadows on the floor. The new higher orientation group stood in front of the sign listening as the HR manager explained what it meant. Mr. Wallace was a former janitor here, she said. Now he's our program director. And this room was named after him not because he climbed a ladder, but because he helped build one. Inside the room, a fresh crop of interns filed into chairs. The slides were already queued up. On the wall behind the podium was a banner for the Second Sight Initiative Real Talent. Real people, real chances. Eric stood just off to the side watching them settle. He still wore simple clothes, dark slacks, a crisp shirt sleeves rolled. Still walked with the quiet gait of someone who didn't want to take up too much space. But now, when he entered a room, the silence that followed wasn't uncertainty. It was respect. The kind that had been earned one conversation at a time. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, starting the session with a smile. Welcome, he said. I know some of you feel like you don't belong here yet. That maybe you're not polished enough, or connected enough, or visible enough. But let me tell you something. He paused, letting the room settle. Belonging isn't something you're handed. It's something you build by showing up day after day and refusing to shrink. A few heads nodded. A young woman in the back wiped her eyes. He smiled again because he remembered exactly what it felt like to sit where they sat. Later that day, Eric found himself called to the rooftop patio. No reason given, just a message from Alyssa Sunset. Bring tea. He packed 2 thermoses. By the time he arrived, the sun was already sliding low behind the city skyline, painting the buildings in amber and rose. Alyssa stood by the railing arms, resting on the ledge, her hair catching the light like strands of bronze. You always know when the sky's about to get dramatic, Eric said, offering her the thermos. I've always had good timing, she replied, accepting it with a smile. They stood side by side for a while, sipping quietly. The wind tugged gently at their sleeves. Neither of them needed to fill the silence. That was one of the things Eric cherished most about her. Alyssa never made stillness feel like absence. She made it feel like home. Do you ever stop and think she asked how unlikely all of this was all the time? She turned to him, her eyes soft. I almost missed you, you know. You didn't. No, she admitted, but I almost did. And I've thought a lot about that lately. How many people do we pass every day who could change the world if someone just paused long enough to see them. Eric glanced over at her, the sky reflecting in his eyes. Maybe that's why we're here now, to keep the doors open for the next person. She nodded, and maybe the one after that. They leaned against the rail again, watching as the first stars peeked through the twilight. Eric reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. Wordlessly, he handed it to her. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. A letter. Alyssa. This isn't a thank you. It's a recognition. You didn't save me. You didn't rescue me. You saw me. And in doing so, you reminded me how to see myself again. That's something I'll carry longer than any title. I hope someday when people talk about leadership they mention you, not because of your position, but because you built something real with compassion and steel in equal measure, and if the world's got room for a few more late bloomers, I'm glad I got to bloom beside you. E. Alyssa folded the letter slowly, pressing it to her chest for a moment before slipping it into her coat. She turned to him. You know you've changed things here, not just systems, people. Eric shrugged. I just told my story. No, she said. You rewrote it, and made space for others to write theirs, too. He looked down for a second, then back at her. I've been thinking, he said, about how love changes shape over time. Her eyebrows lifted, slightly curious. Oh, it's not big speeches or grand gestures. It's tea on rooftops, holding someone's truth with care, showing up every day, even when no one's watching. She didn't respond at first, but then she reached over and took his hand, not fast, not urgent, just sure. You're right, she said. That's exactly what it is. They stood there, two people weathered by life, softened by loss, strengthened by quiet persistence, the kind of love that doesn't burn wild, but glows steady. The sun dipped below the horizon. And in the last light of day, with city lights flickering to life beneath them, Eric Monroe and Alyssa Hartman stood, not as CEO and janitor, not as initiative leads or storybook heroes, but as two people who had refused to stop believing that it wasn't too late, to matter, to rise, to love again. And somewhere across the building and beyond, more doors were opening. More names were being learned. More stories beginning. Because brilliance doesn't always shine. Sometimes it waits quietly until someone finally says, I see you, and means it. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what part of this story spoke to you the most? Drop a comment below. We read everyone. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that remind us of the power of kindness, resilience, and being seen. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care and stay inspired.